Thank you all for coming tonight. This lecture is a several-week kind of process in the making of research and looking into the background and historical context of the treasure trove of items discovered within this time capsule from over 100 years ago. But without further ado, let's discover what is inside the 1919 time capsule from the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hospital. So with this slide, we set our scene. In September of 1919, as World War I had ended, the Masonic home campus in Utica, New York was beginning to grow under the leadership of Superintendent William J. Whiley. 27 years following the founding of the Masonic Asylum, established in 1893 as a home for worthy indigent Masons, their widows, and orphans. This photograph in particular is actually from the time capsule. It shows in the center the old administration building flanked by two American flags on flagpoles. The road running up to it, far left, you can see the Daniel D. Tompkins Memorial Chapel, which was built in 1911. The old administration building began construction in 1891 and was pretty much finished, and they moved in by 1893. So this was the setting in Utica where the hospital, whose time capsule this was made for, was put into. But explaining the need for the hospital. With the end of World War I, there were Masonic veterans returning home for the war in need of medical care. But it was clear that the campus needed a new hospital building. So at the end of the war, there was a fund of about $700,000, which had been raised to assist servicemen during the war. The Masonic home decided to use this money to help construct the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hospital at the campus in Utica. Previously, in May of 1919, Master Worshipful William S. Farmer, who's the Grand Master of Masons in New York at the time, stated the following, that for years there's been a crying need for a hospital. At present, the trustees are compelled to reject many an application for admission to the home for the reason that the subject of the application is suffering from disease, either chronic or acute, and therefore not admissible. The result of this is that the very patient most in need of our benefaction is turned down, and in many cases or instances, compelled to spend the period of his incapacity either in an almshouse or become the subject of some private charity. And he also mentioned that as Masonic veterans were returning from World War I, that they should go to a place at the campus where they could get, quote-unquote, medical care free of all expense. So once it was decided, this was the picture of when it was completed, around 1922, the actual building where the Cornerstone was placed into. But this picture provided to me from our branch up in Utica of the Library Museum. It shows the Cornerstone laying back in September 20th, 1919. You can see the winch crane in the middle, which is laying it into place in this image. And it was reported in the September 20, 1919 issue of the Utica Saturday Globe that thousands of Masons marched in a parade from Genesee Street, Utica, the campus of the Masonic home where the Cornerstone ceremony took place. And you can see how big the crowd was in this image of the laying, but also to see how little there was actually built in that half of the campus at the time. You can see that when it was sealed, this is the image of the plaque that I got from one of the programs in the box. It said, "The glory of God and reverent memory of the Masons who died in the Great War to maintain the principles of freedom, justice, and fraternity. This cornerstone was laid September 20, AD 1919, AL 59, 19 by most worshipful William Sidney Farmer, Grand Master Masons in the state of New York. So once it had been sealed, they put this plaque, I believe, over, sealing it for 100 years. So this is a picture of the children's band as one of the festivities that performed during the ceremony of laying the cornerstone, as shown in this image. So, the time capsule was sealed in the cornerstone, and the building was constructed. And then finally, 100 years later, I had the distinct honor of being invited for the special communication on October 5th, 2019, to open the time capsule with Master Worshipful William Sardone, the current Grand Master. You can see, as I was reading the inventory from the box, green box, which is made of copper, on the table, and the Grand Master standing next to me. So you can see the box itself was, as Sardone, as Master Worshipful Sardone mentioned, was cut open at four corners with metal cutting pliers, which are visible on the top of the box and the image on the left. On the right, you can see the inside with the lid as it sits inside the box. So you're probably all asking, what was inside? As you can see, this image taken as we had gotten the time capsule back down from Utica, and we're slowly starting to take the items out of the box and inventorying and cataloging the collection contained therein. So the first significant item we found was actually the flags. There was a large American flag, which we estimated in height about 6.5 feet tall, handmade. I noticed every star stripes were, you literally see how they were stitched into it by hand. You don't see as much these days with American flags. You can see it in the image on the right. Christine is there counting the stars. We counted it at 46, which would date it to, at earliest, the time in Oklahoma was admitted as a state to the Union on November 16, 1907. When this was the flag that, when President William Howard Taft and Theodore Roosevelt, both Masons, were serving as president, in the period from about 1907 to 1912. This is before it became the 48-star flag once New Mexico and Arizona became U.S. states. I wasn't quite able to find what was the context of why they put the flag in the box. I theorized, though, that the flag did seem rather old, older than 1919. My theory was that it may have been retired from one of those flagpoles on either side of the administration building, and possibly, rather than sending it to an army base for ritual cremation, they decided to fold it up and put it in the box instead to preserve it for the future. On the left, you can see they were kind of rolled up in a copy of the Masonic Standard, a Masonic publication of the time. There was the flags of all the nations allied with America in World War I. Two for the British, plus the American flag, French, Italian, and Belgian. The flags were probably included in light of the Treaty of Versailles being signed in 1919, which ended the war. The Allied powers were obviously the victorious powers in the war. And then, just quickly, this was a typed inventory, which I actually read at the communication. 3 pages typed on stationery from the home that outlined every item, or as actually most of the items listed. Some items, though, as I will explain, actually were not listed in the inventory. So they put this in to keep track of the items before it was sealed. I actually found this list right underneath the flag when we took the flag out of the box, which was good because I could just read the list without telling the audience about every single object and taking them out of the box. We could keep the collection together. So just to start with the photographs, there were several photographs in the time capsule. I've already shown this one that shows the old administration building, and then the Tompkins Memorial Chapel. Was just one of many photographs. Most of them were actually of people. One of them was actually a Freemason, Charles H. Johnson, or Charlie, Freemason of Ancient City Lodge number 542 in Albany, New York. He would later serve as Grand Master and Grand Secretary, lived in Albany, retired minister, also worked on social welfare for the mentally ill, children, and the incarcerated. He was actually a deputy warden of Sing Sing Prison in 1914, served on the New York State Commission of Social Welfare from 1916 to 1932. I theorize that the construction of the Memorial Hospital was probably significant to him, hence why he put his photo in the box. He actually lost his only son, Orville, who was killed in action July 18, 1918, at Chateau Thierry in World War I as a second lieutenant serving with the 112th Machine Gun Battalion of the 26th Division. So because he lost his son, this Memorial Hospital probably meant something to him, because in part it was dedicated to Masons who died during the war. Second one was found in the back of this program, 1896, of John Stewart, another Mason who at one time served as Grand Master, 1896. He was also Deputy Grand Master before that, served as a trustee with the Masonic Hall and Asylum Fund, treasurer of the Board of Trustees of the Masonic Home, member of Albion Lodge number 26, it's now called St. John's Lodge. I believe it's now called St. John's Lodge number 1. So he was very involved with a lot of Masonic institutions, which is probably why he put the program in the box. He was also in charge of the committee which eventually constructed this building that we're in right now. And then moving to another Mason who was involved, Freemason George T. Montgomery, a District Deputy Grand Master from 1903 to 1904, also involved as a trustee of the Masonic Hall and Asylum as well. He was actually serving as treasurer of the Masonic Home in Utica when the Cornerstone was originally laid. And then William S. Farmer, fourth photograph, member of Central City Lodge number 305 in Syracuse, New York. He was at the time of Cornerstone Lane, he was a Syracuse native, worked as a judge, also a lawyer. He'd previously worked as a banker as well. He was chairman, actually, of the New York committee that helped to raise funds for the Alexandria, Virginia monument to George Washington, which is kind of interesting. And then Robert H. Robinson, fifth photograph. He was actually a retired wholesale drapery merchant who had previously worked for Mills and Gibbs Corporation of 2 Park Avenue. Lived in New York City. Noted orator. He was actually he served as treasurer of the General Synod of the Reformed Church of America. He used to speak on the significance of the Bible and other subjects. 33rd degree Mason and member of Crescent Lodge number 402, so he's with Scottish Rite. He served in positions such as Grand Marshal of the Grand Lodge, Deputy Grand Master. He was also Grand Master as well, and also served on many Masonic committees, the Committee for the Grand Lodge, on the Committee for the Grand Lodge Committee on the Hall and Asylum in 1916, the Masonic Home in Utica, and even the War Relief Committee in 1918. Sixth photograph was of S. Nelson Sawyers, also Freemason, lifelong Palmyra, New York resident, 33rd degree member of Palmyra Lodge 248 in Palmyra, New York. He was also Grand Master from 1908 to 1910. Was a New York Supreme Court Justice from around 1908 to 1929. He was actually the one that suggested the idea of the chapel that was put on the Masonic home campus as well, and he actually helped with the laying of that cornerstone. Like previous photographs, he was also a Mason who was involved with many committees, War Relief Commission, Hall and Asylum Committee, and the committee that actually erected the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hospital in Utica. He was also a longtime member of the New York Historical Society, which might explain why he was interested in putting items in this box of historical artifacts. And then finally, okay. Well, now this image was Superintendent William J. Wylie. He was the first superintendent at the Masonic home who actually served for a really lengthy period. He was actually nicknamed Dad Wylie because he was so caring of the children at the Masonic home. And he served as superintendent from 1906 to 1945, so it was nearly 40 years. 33rd degree Mason, a member of Capsule Lodge number 641 in New York City. He was actually voted in 1930 as the outstanding citizen of Utica. He also at one time served as past Grand Master of the New York Grand Lodge. It was actually Wylie who, during his tenure, he discontinued education of orphan children on the Utica campus, and he actually got them to be able to go to public schools in Utica. He also, many buildings were constructed during his tenure as well. Wylie Hall, the Memorial Hospitals I've mentioned, the John W. Borman Memorial Dormitories, 1923 Cottage, the Scottish Rite Building in 1922, Knights Templar Building 1917, the Daniel D. Tompkins Memorial Chapel 1911, and the Charles Smith Infirmary 1907. So he was I was not at all surprised he included his photograph in here because he was very involved with the Masonic home campus. And then, as an additional surprise, the last photograph is of the wife and daughter of Superintendent Wylie, Mrs. Victoria I Wylie, and her daughter, Ms. Victoria I Wylie. I thought it was interesting, an issue of the Masonic Standard from 1911 actually called Mr. Wylie and his wife and daughter Santa Claus and his assistants, because they were so dedicated to serving the children that were at the Masonic home, especially around the holidays. Mrs. Wylie was actually nicknamed Mama Wylie by the children because she was involved with caring for them so much. Her obituaries were full of praise for how much she was dedicated to the home, and they called her the matron of the Masonic home. And her daughter, Ms. Victoria I Wylie, who is the one standing, actually, one of her big actions at the Masonic home, she was actually the organist for the chapel, and she led the children's choir through singing and music. So after the photographs, we get to the newspapers, which actually came with a list they wrote out of all the newspapers enclosed. Not to go through all of them, but they basically included pretty much every New York newspaper at the time, and also all the local Utica newspapers. If what I've seen of time capsules is really done to give whoever opens it an idea of what were the events of the time that was big happening on September 20th, 1919, or around that date. You can see in this one, the two halves of the newspaper. You can see the illustration of the hospital as they were planning to build it, and the portrait on the far left of the Grand Master of the time, William S. Farmer. The big, in some of the local Utica papers, the big event was obviously the Cornerstone Lane, due to the amount of Masons that marched into the parade in the thousands, and it was a big local event. The more national newspapers, such as the New York Times, which was included, the big event was really the 1919 steelworkers strike, which was going on at the time. So that was front page news. And then finally we go to the books included. The first example was a facsimile of the original St. John's Bible, which was used by President Washington when he took the oath of office as President of the United States. So it came in its own special box. Literally looked practically new when we opened it. Several Grand Lodge related publications. Copy of the 1919 Proceedings of the Grand Lodge of New York, which is on the left. And then in the center is the minutes and proceedings of the Conference of Grand Masters of the United States in New York City from 1918. You can note the flags of America with its allies in the center illustration there with the Masonic seal, Grand Lodge. And then in addition, there is a copy of the Certificate of Incorporation and Bylaws of the War Relief okay. Apologies. I read the wrong thing. There are also copies of the Constitution, regulations, definitions, and rules of order for the New York Grand Lodge, Code of Procedure for the New York Grand Lodge from the time period the time capsule was sealed, left and right. And then in the center, this was the 1918 Grand Lodge pamphlet book from Miss Suzanne Silvercreuz and others that was in an envelope from the Office of the Grand Secretary. Basically, the center publication, she actually thanked Master Worshipful Thomas Penny, who was the Grand Master at the time. He sent $5,000 to Belgian relief to help Belgium recover from the devastation following World War I. Okay, here we go. And now we're up to 1919 Grand Lodge Proceedings, the far left. And then the center one is the 1918 gathering of the Grand Masters, the minutes of their proceedings when World War I was still going on. And then finally, the War Relief Administration Certificate of Incorporation and Bylaws. And the War Relief Administration was important because it was set up after America entered World War I in 1917. And the Grand Lodge found that about 50,000 New York State Masons were serving in various branches of the service, and many overseas during World War I. The WRA made arrangements with other American Grand Lodges to set up relief work in France. It was headed by Master Worshipful Townsend Scudder, who raised funds and he selected personnel. However, the conditions at the front, that were combined with a lack of transportation for men and goods, made it hard for the WRA to progress far with their plans before the Armistice Treaty was signed to the ceasefire that was before the Versailles Treaty, the end of the war. So the money that was actually left over was what they ended up using to construct the hospital. Okay, and now there's a copy of the Brotherhood. This is a Masonic publication that discussed topics related to the Scottish Rite and other Masonic subjects. It was in publication about 1913 until it was discontinued in 1920. The gentleman on the left is John Lloyd Thomas. He was secretary of the Masonic Home in Utica, New York at the time, but he was actually also the editor of the Brotherhood, and his picture was actually found inside this publication. And he was also a Freemason as well, of the 33rd degree, so he was involved in Scottish Rite. And we even have a book from the Children's Library, a copy of the Literary Digest as well. I was not really surprised that something from possibly the children of the Masonic home was put in, because at the time they still had the care for the orphan children at the campus at the time. It actually has a sticker that says J Whiley printed on it, so I think possibly Superintendent Wylie may have taken it from the Children's Library and put it in the box before it was sealed. And then finally we move on to medals and plaques. This medal was actually from the Cornerstone lane of the Masonic Temple that had its cornerstone lane on June 2nd, 1875. That was the previous Grand Lodge building in New York. I believe it later burned down, but you can see on the image on the left an image of the actual building. Unfortunately, when they constructed this building, there was quite a debt that was incurred from it because the cost exploded to about $1.5 million. But once built, they actually worked on trying to eliminate the debt from the construction of this building, which was not really done until about the 1880s. But to give you an idea of kind of how the Cornerstone thing is done up close, at least around the time where this is the 1875 Cornerstone lane. You can see they use the crane to lift the top half of the thing on the bottom half. And there is a rectangular cavity in the middle where they would have put the time capsule. So this bronze medal, in short, was meant to commemorate the freedom of debt of the craft from the debt incurred by building the 1875 building. Thankfully, Grand Master Frank R. Lawrence was able to settle the debt by about 1889 or so. Originally, it was $700,000. By the time he was done with his term, they had a surplus of about $200,000. So this coin represents a big point for the craft because they were finally financially stable going into the future. And then this medal with the silk ribbon, it was to commemorate the laying of the cornerstone of the Masonic Asylum in Utica, New York, May 21, 1891. The gold bar on the top actually is 1842 to 1891, which signifies when Brother Greenfield Pote in 1842, he suggested the idea of the Masonic Asylum and home. And then it took them all the way until 1891 when they actually laid the cornerstones. They had secured the land and the funds to build the building. The administrative building was dedicated in October of 1892 and was occupied by 1893. And it could accommodate about 150 people and administrative offices. It was actually torn down in 1965 and replaced with a one-store building. This medal was on the left, is actually from Ocean Lodge, number 156. They were chartered originally on March 5th, 1850 in New York, in Manhattan. They were I believe they put their medal in here because they were involved with many other Masonic commemorative events, such as the Cornerstone laying for the Egyptian obelisk in Central Park. And they also helped to dedicate the present Masonic Hall building that we're in right now, and the Masonic home in Utica. And then on the right, you can see the bronze token from the American Exposition in Buffalo, New York in 1901. I wasn't able to figure out if the Masons had an exhibit during this exposition. I theorize that probably they put it in the box because William McKinley, who's the 25th president, was assassinated during this exposition by an anarchist, and he was a Mason, so they may have done it as a commemoration to him. And then there was an actual plaque for the semi-centennial, 50th anniversary, 1823 to 1873, of Morton Commandery, which I actually figured out was actually called Morton Commandery Number 4 Knights Templar. Brother Frederick Milligan was actually the brother listed in the inventory who donated this and the other medals in the time capsule. And it would make sense that he would have done it because he was actually a Knights Templar. So now we move to probably the last piece, which is the stamps, coins, documents, and other items. The American stamps included several with portraits of George Washington and Ben Franklin, special delivery, and the 24-cent Curtis Jenny airplane stamp. To give an idea of these stamps used on envelopes at the time, around 1919. The inventory doesn't say who gave them, but I think that Freemason Charles H. Johnson, whose photographs mentioned earlier, may have given them, because my research revealed he was actually a stamp collector more than local notes. There was a 1919 U.S. penny, also called the wheat ears penny. It was, or wreath penny, originally designed by Victor D. Brenner, circulation from 1909 to 1958, created to commemorate 100th anniversary of the birth of Abraham Lincoln. It was actually the first cent of this size that actually included the motto, "In God We Trust," on it. And the person who actually donated the coin, Brother George Chase, I didn't find much on him. He was actually with Lafayette Lodge number 64. He was actually a jeweler by profession, which is interesting. There's also a 1919 Buffalo nickel, and also called Indian Head nickel. As you can see in the image on the left of the Native American, and on the right, the buffalo. This was in circulation for about 1913, 1938, designed by James L. Frazier, who modeled the bison, supposedly, on the bison black diamond in the New York Central Park Zoo. Then here, 1917 U.S. silver quarter, the one also called the Standing Liberty quarter, designed by Herman A. McNeil, circulation from 1916-1930. This is the quarter that was used prior to the Washington quarter, around the time of the Sun Capsule Lane. And then the 1915 silver dime, also called Barber or Liberty Head dime. Obverse was designed by Charles E. Barber, who was the chief engraver of the U.S. Mint at the time. Its reverse was actually created by James B. Longacre in 1860 for the Liberty seated dime. This particular dime is in circulation from 1892 to 1916. So they basically had Barber design a different obverse, but they kept the other one from the previous coin. And then there's also, this was interesting, a $50 silver coin, Columbian Exposition. This was only minted from 1892 to 1893 during the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893 in Chicago, Illinois. You can see the portrait of Christopher Columbus and one of his ships with the two globes. So this was done in commemoration of the exposition. It was one of the very earliest American commemorative coins. And then there were also much older coins from the 19th century included as well. There was this 2-cent coin as well. This one was in circulation from about 1864 to 1873 when they actually discontinued the 2-cent coin by an act of Congress. This was used around the end of the U.S. Civil War into Reconstruction. Then was the 1819 U.S. copper 1-cent coin, which also called the matron head large cent. It was designed by Robert Scott, circulation from 1816 to 1836. Eventually, they started to phase these large cents out around 1857 officially because they were larger than the typical penny that we have now and weren't as easy to handle. But yeah, a very old coin. And then an even older one, the 1804 U.S. copper half-cent coin, also called the draped bust half-cent. It's called so because the image of liberty on the left, the flowing hair, had a draped bust on the design of the coin. Very early coin. It was only in circulation from about 1800 to 1808. Also designed by Robert Scott. This was actually, this type of coin, the half-cent, was actually one of the original coins established by the Mint Act of April 2, 1792. It was actually the smallest denomination of American coinage. But like with the large cents, it was also the Coinage Act of 1857 discontinued their production. So they're not really common. And then finally with the pamphlets, you see the one on the left was actually from the Cornerstone lane. I'm not going to go into the entire elaborate ceremony, but around the time capsule, they basically had a prayer that was said by the Grand Chaplain. Presentation of the box was made by the Grand Treasurer. Contents were read by the Grand Secretary, which was followed by music. The box was deposited in the Cornerstone by the Grand Treasurer. And there were many other steps to it. The, Grand Master spread the cement before it was finally sealed. And then there was also this pamphlet of a Masonic meeting on SS Nordum from July 1st, 1919. Wasn't able to find too much on the historical context of this item, but the itinerary for the program mentions prayers, chairman's address, other addresses, songs, a roll call. Also includes a directory of all the Masons who actually attended the meeting, which is interesting, and all their respective lodges that they were members of. And then with these three items, the one on the far left was the program from the United Grand Lodge of England's Peace Jubilee celebration from June 23 to 29, 1919 in London, England, which was held at the end of World War I. I actually read the program, and it was basically a meeting the English Masons had in celebration of the end of the Great War, and it mentioned how they visited many landmarks in London, such as the House of Parliament and St. Paul's Cathedral. There was actually a letter in the box from September 9, 1919 that actually said that the Grand Secretary Robert H. Robinson actually donated it. The center item is a facsimile of a certificate of exemption for Dirigio Lodge number 30 on January 31, 1887, that exempted Dirigo Lodge number 30 from paying dues to New York Grand Lodge because they had already paid a sum equal to $6 for each member to the Grand Lodge. The total was $924.00. Not very much for dues back then, only $6. And then finally, on the far right here, you have an apron that was included, that was worn at the laying of the Cornerstone of the Masonic Asylum in Utica, New York on May 21, 1891. According to the inventory, the apron was and the certificate were donated by Right Worshipful Aaron Morris, who was a New York City resident. He served as Grand Steward from 1901 to 1902, and he was a member of Dirigo Lodge number 30 of the First Manhattan District, which probably explains why he included the certificate. I wasn't able to figure out, though, if he was actually at the Cornerstone Lane, but he might have been if he included the apron. And then the 1919 yearbook, which I found upon reading it, was actually from St. John's Lodge number 1, listed Masonic officers of the lodge, directory of their members, and other information along with where they met during 1919. There was a event notice, you can see here, for Colonel Walter C. Montgomery, Chief Surgeon of the 27th Division of the American Expeditionary Forces, which was held, this meeting in honor of him was held at St. John's Lodge number 1 on April 10th, 1919. It was a welcome home event for him where he would share his war stories. So probably included in the box as it relates to a Masonic veteran. I actually figured out that he got the Distinguished Service Medal during World War I when during 4 days in action on the Hindenburg Line, he was actually able to evacuate about 4,000 wounded in 4 days, despite the fact he had limited medical personnel or transportation to do the job. And then finally, the last two items. There was the address that was actually delivered by Right Worshipful Cornelius Welfkin, D.D., at the laying of the Cornerstone. This is the copy of the address. I won't read the entire address, but he basically goes into this theme about how everything has an inside and an outside meaning, and he goes into the whole history of Masons as building buildings, going back to ancient times in the Middle Ages. And in this speech, he actually mentions, "So today we are convening in the ceremony of laying a cornerstone. It is a common function which takes place with the erection of every communal or public building, whether devoted to religious, charitable, or official usage. The formal placing of a stone to join the walls, the depositing of a few archives and memorials of our generation, which other generations may or may not read. These are outside features which could be performed without our presence. Why then are we assembled in such numbers and with such formality to witness this common act? We are here for something more than a holiday and the passing exchange of friendly greetings. We bring memory, imagination, conscience, reason, and will to this occasion, and by a concentration of all these faculties, we aim to commune with the invisible and spiritual realities toward which all our symbols point." And then finally, an amusing item that was put in as well. There was an actual weather report made when they sealed the box. What it said was September 20th, 1919, 9 o'clock a.m., wind southwest. It rains from about 1 a.m. to 8 a.m., very high wind. At this writing, the wind still continues high, the sky cloudy, and looks anything but a promising day. for the ceremonies of the laying of the stone. And then on the bottom it says, P.S. 11 o'clock a.m. Beautifully clear. Every prospect of a sun-shining afternoon. So now we have reached the bottom of the box, this treasure chest frozen in time from the days of masonry 100 years ago. I hope that you enjoyed my discussion of the items from this time capsule which the Freemasons of yesterday chose to present as an inheritance to the Freemasons of today. Thank you.